So, hello everyone. The presentation will be about test automation, as you see, and I'm Norbert Gulácsi from EPAM Systems. It will be in English for non-native speakers, but if you have more courage on the question and answer part, you can initiate it in Hungarian as well. All right. So briefly, 30 minutes won't be enough for exhaustively show you a full role what is test automation about. So I will be mostly working with examples. First of all, we'll have a couple of words about what is exactly test automation. After that, we will figure out an imaginary project, maybe not that imaginary, and how we would initiate test automation on that project. And after that, we will talk about a couple of, that will be the most example-like part, a couple of challenges, what can happen in daily work, basically. So I cannot summarize all the things that can happen, and it was pretty random. Some of them are high-level issues, some of them are related, some of them are architecture or planning, but a couple of everything from every aspect, or very but a few. That part is planned pretty interactively, so I hope you will be a bit interactive in that part, but I will manage if you won't as well. All right. So what is test automation? That will be the first section. And I just stole for you a brief definition. Actually, you can find the version of definitions for everything in the industry. So let's discuss briefly and in a simple way. When you develop something, when you write any code, you have to check if that is correct. That is called testing, basically. When you write a login, you have to check that login works. And what is test automation above that is not checking that manually, but writing some code or using some tool to check that login, that it works. And why do we do that? A couple of benefits. It could be a very long list, but I just highlighted a couple of important ones. And I try to be in time. So for sure, it's faster. Let's imagine you have to execute a lot of tests. A lot of features has to be checked. That is an example. You have to check the whole application, that everything is correct after a major change. Can you do that in an hour? Probably no. But a well-written script and a well-planned script can do. And the other aspect would be, so let's imagine you are a manual tester, and there are a lot of developers. In the example, we have 10. Can you be there next to each of the developers and test everything what they do all the time? Probably not. But if you write a simple script, can that do that? Sure, after each commit if it's necessary. And there is another aspect, it increased accuracy. So after a whole day of testing, for example, hundreds and hundreds of test cases you executed, a lot of features you checked, would you do any mistake? Probably yes. But if you write a test in an automated way, and that is written correctly in the first place, then that's probably will be executed properly, no matter how many times you have to execute it. And by these benefits or any other benefits we do not mention here, it can easily be figured out that it saves us time, and time is money when you are talking about software development. So test automation really works it. Okay. Next section would be about introducing test automation on a project. I just figured out some imaginary project. I was not too creative, so it might be a bit familiar as well. Let's imagine our imaginary project is a system that can handle student and teacher transactions for a university. Yeah, pretty similar, yeah. We can talk about the aspects I would like to mention through on this project. And let's imagine the situation that this project just recently decided to introduce or reintroduce test automation for it. What questions should be discussed in this situation? I just highlighted a couple. So, for example, we will have already something on the project. We will have already testing, at least manual testing is on the project, or even automation is already there. Because if you already have some value, you have to use that, or it's more beneficial to use that. Sometimes it's more beneficial to rewrite the whole thing or just leave it. But if it was of quality, then you can continue from where it is. For example, the manual part is pretty important because test automation starts with manual testing. You have to define what has to be tested at the first place, because then you can put those tests into scripts. Another important aspect would be for a new project or a project that introduces test automation, that what should be the scope of test automation. Because maybe they are satisfied how certain parts are tested manually, or it's just hard to automate some parts, or differently handle that. So that's why you always have to clarify what are the needs, what are the expectations, what should be tested in the first place by automation. So, for example, in our case, let's say that our team of 10, I don't know, would automate tests for student transactions. Just an example. Or what type of test should you use? Should you only write UI test, or should you write service test? So you have to check from the UI all the possible classes, for example, or is it enough to have it on service layer, checking that request really provides a response with those classes if you provide a proper authentication method. Or maybe both, and probably in most cases both, but then you have to decide in what amount should you have UI test, service test, unit test, but that's usually not even done by automation testers, but by developers, but sometimes we do that as well. And some special animal, the performance or the security is also mentioned. Let's check the time. We have enough for everything. We have to also discuss how many times those tests needs to be executed. Is it only a nightly execution, daily or weekly, or after each commit? That is the most useful one. But if the tests are not really healthy, then let's imagine you execute 500 of tests after each commit, but 400 of them always die. Then the developer will be more confused rather than helped out by those tests. Another aspect would be important to consider that what technologies should we use when you initiate or continue test automation for a new project. For sure, language, for example, is important. What the tester provider is familiar with, what is the software under test is using, what the other side of the team, for example, developers are using. Why is that important? Because maybe it is more easy to integrate the same language, if the tests are written in the same language, it is more easy to integrate it with all the existing tools and the infrastructure. Also, if you go to location and you are hit by a bus, then maybe developers can continue that as or other testers as the language would be the same. Then what tools should be used? Yeah, couple of examples. So it might be pretty important what IDE is used for some. Maybe you are super efficient with one of them, but you are not even familiar with another. Or For the special elements like performance testing, you have to decide if JMeter should be used or load runner. Another example I mentioned is test report visualization. It's pretty important. So if you if you want to see your test results, there will be a lot of tools around, shiny and fancy and colorful, but you have to really find what is the most suitable for you. Right? Because if you do and use it day by day, and you check the results, I don't know, every day twice, then if every test case is a couple of seconds faster to check in a certain tool than in another, then if you summarize that, that will be hours in the month or days in the year. So small efficiency aspects do really matter. Also, some of them are more featureful than others. They can be integrated with more stuff, and that can be pretty convenient as well. Okay, another aspect that can be discussed, what other resources we have or do we need? So, for example, I hope you're familiar with the CI/CD concept, but if not, basically it's about automating test execution. So when initiating test execution can be automated or scheduled to start every morning without any human interaction, or if a new branch is created in your Git repository, if a new commit is pushed up, you can specify it in multiple ways. And for that, you need some servers, you need some CI/CD tools that are not free, or at least not free for business reasons. And then you have to discuss what should be used then. And for sure, another basic example that you will need a Git repository. And maybe that will be for the company, it will be some private repository that everyone is using, or the client requests something special. But you have to define that you need that, and then you discuss which one is the suitable. And a couple of, the rest, I would say a lot of things could be mentioned here. Again, I just mentioned, so you for sure have to define what goals, what expectations do we have for this test automation. Do we have any deadlines? For example, every test should be automated, what we already had in manual test cases. Or in our imaginary project, by, I don't know, August, all the features that are related to applying to a class should be covered by test automation. Or the whole thing should be covered with the most basic happy flows. By the end of the year, you have to check even the happy flows, but the really edge cases and all the possible error messages and stuff like that. Another important aspect would be the ownership. Who should be responsible for what? So who will execute from the team the tests? Who will check that? How recently should that be checked? How in what level should be the developers be involved into the whole process? How the client is involved in the whole decision making, for example, where the automation should be aimed for, and stuff like that. Yeah, and it's definitely important how many human beings will we have who can write automated tests, for example. Okay, so I think we are pretty in time. The next one will be the possible challenges and improvements. As I mentioned, I hope to have this bit in an interactive way. And again, if you feel more courage, you can ask or answer in Hungarian as well. It will be like a lifelike challenge, and after that, there will be possible a solution I mentioned there. But before I show the possible solution, I suggest maybe you can have some ideas. How would you solve it? I know that it's pretty rough. What is automation in since 10 minutes? but maybe you have some cool ideas how you solve certain challenges for this imaginary project. So let's imagine you are working in a team. There are developers, there are clients, there are managers and testers and test automation engineers. And the client does not understand what are you doing in your 8 hours every day. He does not understand the results. He does not understand nothing at all from what you are doing. Do you think this is a problem? And if yes, implied answer, if yes, what would you do against that? Let's test your interactiveness, if there is a word like that. You meditated in the previous class, so I just asked for sentences. Okay. All right. Maybe we will be more creative for the next ones. So it's definitely a problem. It's definitely a problem because if the client does not know you are worthy, your work is worthy, then yeah, your work, your position won't be lasting long, and that will not be beneficial for the project either. Because if you really done something useful, and then you are fired, or I don't know how to express that in a more useful way. But if you are kicked out from the project and done something useful, then it will be felt in the project when you leave, and there won't be test automation, or less test automation will be there. So definitely, if clients and decision makers don't understand what you are doing, then you have to make them understand. You have to discuss them. What are you doing? Why that you are doing? And what are those benefits? And how you can show those benefits? We call it in the industry metrics, but I just wanted to express myself in a simple way, because I know that this might be a much short amount of time. So you have to show numbers. You have to show, for example, that testing was a week before automation testing was in place, because manually checked, everything was manually checked. But after test automation was introduced, you just execute your scripts, and it is 10 minutes instead of a week. Hundreds and hundreds of tests are executed, and instead of that time spent on manual testing or creative work, and more improvements can be implied. Also, less bugs are found since then in production, because we find it more earlier, as we can test more, and such benefits. We have to discuss all these things, and I would say so that shouldn't managers or someone like that express that for the client? The answer is no. So you are the expert of a certain area. No one else will come to you and say that why your field of area makes sense. You always have to answer that for everyone in the team. It's your responsibility. Okay. Next, lifetime challenge would be, and as you see, not all of them are code specific. When I started the university, I thought that it would be 8 hours coding or something like that, but the aspects are there. And maybe we cannot go through them all with examples, but then we'll just show it with challenge and solution as well. So let's imagine the situation that a product bug was missed by the test automation. So product bug is in production, and students are not being able to apply for classes. You have maybe some ideas what the test automation engineer should do in such a position. I promise I will give up after the second one.
Could we say, like, change the script?
Yes, it's a good one, and it's definitely a step for the solution. And what script you have to change? And is that enough?
It's not
Not enough, why?
Because it could also be almost identical with the, because you find the, from the bottom.
Great.
You could also try manually searching for it.
Yes, great. Yeah, we arrived. Yeah, so the same problem can happen because we did that mistake. Why we did that mistake? We have to understand why that was missed. So that's the part of the investigation. What happened? Why was that not covered by the test in the first place? Because if we just fix that, we will do the same mistake in the future again. Or we already did it in some other parts. Yeah, it was a good answer. I mentioned some notes as well. Okay, the next one would be test execution time is more than 10 hours and we are really not satisfied. We have a lot of tests and 10-hour execution is there. What do you think? What can we do in such situations with our tests? Sorry, louder a bit. So we want to keep the coverage. We have a lot of automated tests, let's say 500, but executing them is 10 hours long. And that is too much because we have to test each commit, for example, or at least we would like to, but we cannot with this long amount of time. What can we do? And please consider all my questions as real life-like situations. Actually, even in promotions, we ask questions like that, and the maturity of your answer can define what level you are.
Is it possible to write the automation with testing code?
Sorry, could you please repeat?
The test code. It's going to be more efficient. Time.
Yes, but it is already in code, so it's not manual testing.
So you can just click the test which is taking long time, in 1 week. Take the tests which are taking shorter than another group and consider the long ones, what is happening over there, review over there, and then make them more efficient.
What a mature answer. Great, super. You have also another idea?
Just say that debugging the
That's also an option. Yes. And sorry, did I misunderstood you? Okay. So it's already code already. Yeah. So we heard two answers actually, and there are a lot of more options for sure. Yeah, one of them is maybe debugging the test code because it is not written in an efficient way. It's just that code that you rewrite and errors are spared. And the other one is grouping them and define what is the more priority one, what are checking the most important features, and maybe you just execute that usually, and slower ones just based on the plan, I don't know, weekly, or that not even covers important aspects, and you do not have to use them that much than the important ones. So it was a pretty, the ideas were pretty good, and actually yours as well, because if we would not talk about automated tests, then for sure automating would spend a lot of time for us. There are some other aspects I mentioned, actually, and if you see, there is your answer, so that's also cool. But you can also remove unnecessary tests. So maybe it's just even duplicates, or it's not checking anything important, or it to be always being green for years, and other tests may be checking that as well. So you can just remove tests. It's actually, everything has a funny name, or not funny, but everything has a special official name, and that is actually a pattern, and it's called kill the zombies, because those not checking anything useful. And most of that's a technological solution I can suggest. Most of the frameworks or your code can do parallelization as well. So if you have a 10-hour test execution, and you use 10 threads, maybe that would be just 1 hour long test execution. Okay, these were pretty high level. I think we started 5 minutes later, so I think I'm still on time with that. Okay. Right, still that page. Oh yeah, and review test code, there is your answer as well, so it was pretty good. Yes, so the next ones are a bit more low level. And maybe more related to the example project as well. So the first challenge would be setting up test data precondition is time consuming. Let me explain that can be. So let's say you have to check, you have to have a test that that cancels your application for an exam. What you need for that? You have to have that exam in place for your test user. And how you can do that? For example, that would be already the solution. So let's say the automation is clicking everything together to put you in the position where that test user already has some exams that he can cancel. And that is time consuming. How would you shorten that time of this preparation phase? Could you be promoted?
Use the data server.
Yes, for example, that would be a good one. Yes? Maybe something else? Yeah, so actually that is one of the most typical solution. And actually I myself write something similar. You can initiate that state by lower level interfaces. You have to send data right away into database, I don't know, from JSONs or something, and you can use services as well. So maybe clicking around the UI, the automation can do that as well. But clicking around the UI is still slower even for automation than just using a simple request. Maybe even the simple request that we have to use, what we do actually on UI, is a page where we have to navigate a lot. So back to our imaginary jet, have to click on the, I don't know which tab, the exams tab, you have to click on the exact press, and the pop-up comes up and stuff like that, while nothing happens in the background actually. And when we really apply for that exam, that will be the first request we actually need for our test data. And we can use services for that state. But maybe we send data right away to the database as you mentioned. Well, another option would be, yeah, a bit weaker option, but actually if a lot of tests are kind of similar, then you can structure your test in a way that the same logic is applied on same places, but with different test data. That can fasten up a bit as well. Okay, let's quickly finish the other two. The challenge would be that we experience that whenever something is changed for students, even the teacher-related tests are broken. What might be the solution here? Why we actually have this problem in place? And the image is pretty copy.
Because like the code wrote, which it's not separating the task code here and there, so it wasn't efficient enough.
Yes, exactly. Wasn't efficient enough. And if I would like to add more details, what does that mean? It means that we could apply a lot of best practices. For example, for this certain example, we probably make some logic that should be separated in the background. And why we did that? Because we did not use anything what we could use for any software development. So let's forget that writing a test automation framework and testing it is basically writing an application, writing software code that proves everything, design patterns, best practices, I don't know, every suggestion that is good for any general software or code development is also good for writing automated tests. So probably we missed our logic, or I don't know, our object-oriented class hierarchy is in a bad shape, and we have to write that code in another way. The last example would be that application is unstable around September, when all the students are applying for their classes. What can be the solution here? And sorry for taking this, but maybe it's interesting enough. Exactly, stress test. So why that happens? Because it was not tested. We have to simulate the situation in tests. What happens actually in September? What happens in September? A lot of users are trying to do interactions simultaneously at the same time. And the system is not prepared for that. There is not enough CPU time. I don't know, servers are weak in a way. You have to test that out, and then you figure out your weakest points, the bottleneck, and then you know what type of servers should be strengthened or built in more instances. Okay, actually, this was it. If you have any further questions, you can find me